So now we get to part 3 of the short-term causes of the Chinese Civil War. So in reality, this is a bit more of the immediate cause, which is the Northern Expedition. And then the Northern Expedition comes to end with the Shanghai Massacre. And it is with that and the ensuing White Terror do we have the beginnings of the Chinese Civil War. Which brings us to the Northern Expedition. The Northern Expedition is this attempt to unify the country. Obviously, they are moving north. So basically marching from strongholds of power, moving north to the country, attempting to unite it under a central government, and along the way, part of what they're doing is educating the peasantry about this unified China, and of course, explaining it to them in a way that they can understand. So the Northern Expedition is successful, and then basically in 1927, we have a breakdown of the United Front.
As his army trained, Sun and his wife Sun Qingling sailed to Beijing to negotiate with the city's warlord. But Sun was ill with cancer. He died soon after arriving in Beijing on March 12, 1925. In death, Sun was revered as the father of the Chinese Republic. There was no one of his stature to take over the leadership, and a struggle for power in the party began. Chiang Kai-shek emerged the victor. In June 1926, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Northern Expedition, the campaign to unite the country. A month later, the young army set out. Full of patriotic enthusiasm, they won victory after victory. In just 6 months, they defeated 34 warlords, and they swept up to central China.
All along the way, the people welcomed us. For example, they would boil water and cook sweet potatoes by the side of the road where our troops were passing. They would say, "Brothers, come and eat and drink. Help yourselves." The army was well disciplined then. And so the soldiers and the officers, they always paid for whatever they ate and drank.
When the Northern Expedition Army reached our region, they held mass rallies. Everybody went. At the rallies, speakers talked about the cooperation between the nationalists and the communists. They called for the defeat of the northern warlords and the imperialists, and they asked peasants not to pay land rent and debts. I didn't know much about revolutions then. I didn't know a thing about communism or opposing imperialism. But it seemed like a good idea to fight exploitation and the northern warlords.
Oops.
Many in the Army's propaganda teams were communists. They explained the goals of the Northern Expedition, and they called for the end of many deeply ingrained social customs. Wang Ping soon joined the communists.
We knocked down Buddha statues in the temples. Foot binding was still popular where I lived, and we urged young girls not to bind their feet, and women who had already done it to undo their feet. At first, we didn't know better, and often we ordered people to do things against their will. If a young woman refused to cut her hair, several of us would hold her and cut it anyway.
And here we have a handy-dandy map of the Northern Expedition. You can see from the south of the country where the Kuomintang forces were moving, heading north. And you can also see, and if you look at that blue line, that is for the Kuomintang. The thing is, we focus on the CCP and the GMD, but in addition to the CCP, the GMD also has to overcome the warlords and other groups that were vying for control. So the Kuomintang was another very ideologically oriented group, nationalist. They were very separated from the GMD. Geographically isolated, so they kind of developed differently, and then there will be rebelling against the GMD as well. So even though we focus on those two groups, please also understand within China that we have other groups vying for control as well. And yeah, so as you can see, everybody is making their way towards Beijing because, well, that was the political capital, and just kind of attempting to unite the country from the south to the north. As the Northern Expedition is underway, some things become increasingly clear to Chiang Kai-shek. So, the CCP's power and influence is growing like extraordinarily, to the point where Chiang starts being worried that that the power of the GMD is being undermined. Remember that the CCP is being incredibly influential and successful with the peasantry, and the peasantry form like the ginormously enormous part of the population. There is an increasing number of strikes as the CCP is encouraging the peasants and workers to strike against landlords to refuse to work. The GMD is afraid that this is going to alienate the middle class supporters. Now, the CCP, massive amongst the peasants. The GMD, from its inception, has had a much greater showing amongst the middle and upper classes. And so the people who are the supporters of the GMD are the landlords who are being financially harmed by these strikes. So upon reaching Shanghai, we have the Shanghai Massacre, and thousands of CCP and trade unionists were targeted. And from Shanghai, it spreads to other countries. And this is basically the beginning of the White Terror. And so in the following slide is a video about 4 or 5 minutes that discusses the Shanghai Massacre from the point of view of those who were there. But I would also like to warn you that some of the images are disturbing. So there you go.
I didn't know what they were up to, communism or whatever, but I saw that they made trouble. They tried to destroy our religion, our family system, and our ethical structure. For instance, young people's respect for the old. My father told me that the biggest fault of communism was that it was inhuman. So what seemed to be cooperation between the nationalists and the communists during the Northern Expedition was actually only our temporary concession.
So we wanted to purge the party, but it was a pretty dangerous thing to do. We could have been finished off. Both sides might move at the same time. The communists were all among us. The problem was how to do the purge.
Chiang planned to purge the communists when his army reached Shanghai. Here, communist workers, led by Zhou Enlai, had formed armed guards and taken control of the city. They were completely unaware of Chiang's plan to break them, and they eagerly waited for his army to arrive. Nationalist troops moved into Shanghai. Chiang struck on April 12, 1927.
About 1 in the morning, I saw some guys in plain clothes run over. Our guards asked them the passwords, and they began to shoot. We were already surrounded from all sides, and there were machine guns positioned at the intersections on the streets. They were standing there. Back at headquarters, all our weapons were taken away. They warned us, your workers' guards are disbanded. Go home and don't make trouble.
Chiang Kai-shek's army was in firm control of Shanghai. Communists and workers held a huge demonstration to protest the betrayal.
There were about 100,000 workers there. They marched down the street towards the machine guns, which fired. And immediately more than 100 people died. Many more were wounded. Many were injured. It was raining that day. Bashan Road was a river of blood.
I remember it was drizzling, and I saw many people lying in the mud, still moving. It was very sad. When they arrested us, they beat us with rifle butts. Yes, rifle butts. Some of us were hit on the head and were bleeding. Even then, all we said was, good. That was how we showed our defiance. So they hit us and we said, good, good, and we grit our teeth.
Chiang's purge spread around the country. Unions were closed. Communists and left-wing organizers were arrested. Thousands were executed.
And of course, here is a handy-dandy map of China. And the blue part is the part that is under complete control of the GMD. And then the rest, tenuous control, or where warlords were in control. And the areas, the names with the red boxes around them, that is essentially the warlord that is there that the GMD will have to overcome at the same time as they are having to overcome the CCP. And of course, keeping in mind that these warlords could either choose to throw their support behind either group. In sum, so now we get to the part where we pull together all of this information that we have learned from the first, second, and this video. Keep in mind what we talked about in the previous in terms of the long-term causes. So in what ways did the long-term and short-term causes interact to make war difficult to avert? So how did these various events, like one, the long-term would be the situation, the context, and then the short-term, these various events, how were they sort of like working back and forth together? Right? Look at things a little bit more holistically. And then finally, compare and contrast the short-term causes of the Spanish and Chinese civil wars. Remember, when you do compare and contrast, one of the first things that you have to do is, in terms of the comparisons, the similarities, they're going to be more broad, more general. And then the contrasts are going to be one of two things. More specific aspects of the comparisons that make the situations different. And then, of course, you have the context of each that will be different. So, for example, in the Spanish, in terms of long-term causes, you're not going to have, the Spanish have the Catholic Church, but the Chinese have a different religious context, so that is not going to figure into it quite as much, right? So again, please make sure that as you're working on the compare and contrasting, that you are not just writing down facts or information, but you're actually analyzing them as well. So the why and the how. Okay. Okay, here comes the surprise. Again, I know you guys wait anxiously for this part. So here we goes. What's the difference between a piano and a fish? Do, 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 do. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish. Sorry. And when I saw this, I couldn't resist. So there you go. No more corny jokes, please. You're gonna make me poo my pants. Sorry.